because people can disagree on what debt actually means. And if we don't even agree on that, then we can't talk about technical debt. So debt, I've seen a lot of definitions for debt, right? We might know of debt being, all right, you have a friend here, you have another friend here, all right? This friend gives this friend maybe $10. Now there is that expectation that this friend is going to give back that $10 to this person, all right? So if I give you $10 and I have the expectation that you're gonna give me $10 and you don't give me that $10, guess what? Now this is debt. All right, so that is debt. And one of the best definitions I've heard for this, and I'm gonna share that definition here, is a debt is basically a debt comes into play when expectations are not met. All right, so let me write that. Debt comes when expectations are not met. That's how debt comes into play. All right, so if you give somebody money and they're supposed to give you back money and they don't, you're in debt. If a nation gives another nation loans and that nation is supposed to pay that loan back and they don't, they are in debt. All right, as long as you meet your expectations, you're not in debt, right? But if you're not meeting those expectations, that's how debt comes into play, and that's one of the best definition. And debt doesn't just have to be financial debt. It could be, well, your friend, you're moving, and you call up a friend and they come help you move. All right, all fine and good, right? Willy-nilly. But guess what? This friend that helped you move, there is that expectation that, well, when they are moving in turn, you will come around to help them move. And if you don't, guess what? Expectations are not met in that case. And so there is debt in there. It might just be a debt of a moral debt, but it's still a debt. So if you go around and you meet the expectations that you have, you're not in debt. But if you're not meeting those expectations, that's the best definition for debt. So I think that's good to give us a baseline to talk about technical debt. When expectations are not met, people get in debt. All right. Now, let's talk about technical debt. What is technical debt? So technical debt is really debt that comes as a result of your day-to-day technical activities, bearing in mind that certain expectations of what you're doing are not met, and that's what comes off as technical debt. Let me actually elaborate that a little bit more. So let's say you are a team of developers and basically your job is to build products, all right? And those products have features and functions. So you out and you're building products. It could be, your product could be a website, it could be a game, it could be an app, it could just be resolving tickets for your team, it could be a database, a machine learning model, it could be something. But that product will consist of maybe features and functions you need to deliver to the business. And that's what you have to do, all right? Now, so features and functions, in this case, the product is the expectation. On this side, we're gonna have a couple of constraints, all right? And that constraint could be maybe time, money, and these are the big constraints, all right? And efficiency, and I'm gonna explain what I mean by efficiencies. There might be one or two other constraints that I've left out here, but these are the big ones that you'll find from any technology organization. So if you're an architect, a leader, or just somebody trying to build products, you quickly run against these constraints: time, money, efficiency. So just assume the business comes to you and they need a new button to be put on the website. All right. But guess what? They don't just want that button. They want that button in 2 hours to be up, because if it's not up, the business is gonna lose a lot of money. And so, let me just write that here. New button. That's the feature they want. The constraint, they want it in 2 hours. There's always a constraint tied to anything. All right. It could be a constraint of time. It could be a constraint of money. They might maybe want you to do that and give you a budget to say you have to do it for $10. But whereas it's gonna cost you $100 to do that. So there might be some constraint on budget as such. And then there's another constraint here, efficiency, which I'm gonna talk about. So the business comes, they need a new button on the website within 2 hours. And you look at it and say, for me to do this, there are a lot of things that have to go into place for me to do that. And I'm pointing at efficiency here. You might have to write the code. You might have to test it in development environment. You might have to promote it to stage environment and then do the documentation around that code. All right. So let's write some of those activities down. So write code, test in dev, test in UAT, and then document the code, etc. Right? There might be some other activities that you need to do here to get this feature that the business is asking for out. And so as a decision maker or as an architect or as a developer, we're always bound by those constraints. So we can't just make decisions in a vacuum. We have to make decisions based on these constraints. And so when you look at all the steps in the ideal world that you need to do to get this code out or this feature out of production, and you realize that you cannot logically do all of this within the constraints that have been given, and these constraints can vary, then we start making trade-offs. We start saying, all right, and life is always about trade-off, and same thing with technology. So the trade-off might be, well, what do we really need at the bare minimum to get this code out? We may say, all right, we need to write the code, maybe not test it as well, and then we might just want to promote to production as such. All right, that's the only way we can get this thing out to you in the time that the business is asking for. And businesses are good. They know how to pressure teams to give them what they want. All right. For good or for bad, they know usually. So they might be on the PM. They might be pressuring the product manager. They might be pressuring the development team. Give it to us now. Give it to us now. And so you have to start making these trade-offs. And now the trade-off might be, all right, we're just going to write the code. All right, maybe do very minimal testing, skip the rest, no documentation, no CI/CD. Let me put that here, CI/CD, right, which is kind of DevOps. You might skip some of that. You might say, well, we're not gonna build a microservice. Let me write here, microservice as well. All right. So there are a lot of things that you might normally do to make this code efficient, all right, in the right way. So there's a right way to do things, and there are other options. So you just write the code and you deploy the production so you can make the business happy, all right, and you get the result. But guess what? All these other things that you haven't done, that I'm crossing in X here, becomes your technical debt. So technical debt is really those expectations that haven't met. And you might say, but what happens if the expectations weren't there? And I can make a video on this because there might be two expectations. There might be expectations that you're aware of, and there might be expectations you're not aware of. All right, going back to this business, this scenario here, it's usually very clear with money that, well, if I give you money, then you owe me, you have a debt to me, and you pay back my money, right? It's very clear, we can see money. But there are things that, well, what if every morning I wake up and I say hi to you and I greet you and say, hello, how are you doing? And I check in on you. It might not be very explicit, but there is kind of implicitly the expectation that you should reciprocate that to me, all right? So in that case, it's not a very explicit expectation. It might be just implicit expectations. Same thing with technology. So we might have the very explicit expectations like, well, we write code and we deploy code and, and all the other things. But there might be implicit expectation of, well, maybe your code is working in production, but we need documentation for that code. So if someone else is joining the team, or if we need to add new features, we know what the heck we were doing at the time with documentation. And without documentation, the next work you do might be very, very slow because you don't know what you're working with. So even though documentation is not very explicit, but it's still a very vital thing to have. And so it still falls under technical debt. All right. So just to summarize this, at the very high level, from a technology perspective, technical debt comes as a result of just having to balance constraints and make decisions with these limited constraints. And those limitations are guided by the expectations that we have. All right, those expectations might be pressures coming from the business, and it might just be the reality that we have to deal with the constraints that we have. And so each of those trade-offs that you make when delivering on the features of the business ends up being your technical debt. Some of them will be very clear to you that you have a technical debt, you have to go back and fix it. For example, if I push code to production and I know it doesn't have a documentation, I can always make a list and then go back and make sure we document the code. But the reality is most people never go back to fix their technical debt. All right. It might be, well, we should have built this product using microservices. And that would be the right way to do, but it does take time to set up the microservice pipeline or to break it out into its own microservice. And so you decide that, well, we're just going to take this feature, this new button that we want to add, and just add it to the big code base. And then all of a sudden you end up with a monolith, right? Because one piece you add here, you make one exception, and you're adding code to the same code base. And so you end up with a monolith. Whereas if you put in the effort upfront, you could have ended up with a good microservices architecture that is good and easy to handle. So technical debt usually comes, people don't go out and say, you know what, I'm going to get into technical debt, or I'm just going to create technical debt. It's always, you make one trade-off here, you make another trade-off here, and all of a sudden you wake up one day and you say, oh God, look at all the things we haven't done. All right, and there lies your technical debt. It's just like the person who is interacting with your friends, right? They borrow money here and they borrow money there and they borrow money there, and then maybe they forget to pay this one off and they don't pay that one off, and then they wake up one day and they look around, all of their friends are not happy with them because they owe money to almost everybody and they have a lot of debt to pay. So same thing with technology. Just to share a little story on this, I remember when I was building my application, which I talk about, www.threelly.com, which is threelly.com, a Chrome extension. I had to make a lot of trade-offs to get that extension up. So check it out. It's a free Chrome extension. And some of it was, well, I might not have enough money to pay the developers for the coding. I needed to get it out in the right time, right? I'm not going to work on this forever. So I had a short time to build that. And so as a result, maybe I didn't do a UAT environment or a dev environment, so that introduced maybe potential risk because I could have pushed things directly to prod and cause issues there. But that was a risk I was able to accept because at the time the app wasn't being used as much. So you have to figure out in your situation what kind of trade-offs you want to make. Those become your technical debt, and if you can keep track of those technical debts, you can always know that you will come back and fix them at some point. All right, so hopefully this was helpful. I just thought I'll make a good summary about this. Not a lot of people are aware of this. I don't think there are curriculums that would just teach you about technical debts. If you're aware of one of them, let me know. I want to know. All right, but in the professional world, you run against these constraints. You run against the features you need to deliver, and you start making those trade-offs, and cumulatively that is your technical debt because expectations are not met. All right, thanks for watching. This is Fru. I will see you in the next video.